Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. I'm Audrey Seek. Singapore is tightening the screws on short-term property speculation. Starting today, homeowners who sell a private property within 4 years of buying it will face higher stamp duty rates, ranging from 4% to as high as 16%. This move reverses a relaxation that has been in place since 2017, and it comes on the back of a surge in sub-sales as more people look to cash in on fast rising property prices. So what does this mean for the market, genuine home buyers, and for property investors as well? Joining us now is Nicholas Mak, Chief Research Officer at mogul.sg, to unpack this latest move. Nicholas, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Audrey.
It's great to have you on. Now, news broke pretty much close to midnight, so we really appreciate the quick turnaround here. So let's start with the timing of this. You know, we've seen a slew of cooling measures over the years. We saw ABSD hikes and tighter loan limits recently. Now the spotlight is back on quick property resales with tougher sellers' stamp duties. Was this move a surprise to you?
Well, I think this is something that is on the cards in the government's sites for a while. And it's quite interesting because it was Mr. Lawrence Wong who lowered the seller stamp duty from 4 years to 3 years when he was the Minister for National Development. It was lowered in 2017. And then shortly after that, the market shot up in terms of a lot of people going to the show flats, buying up, so much so that the government had to come in with an even more draconian set of cooling measures in 2018. And now that Mr. Wong is the Prime Minister, I think in a way he is bringing back something that from his days when he was the MND Minister. He's lengthening the seller stamp duty. And I think there's also another thing is that developers lining up quite a number of projects, as many as 6 to 7 projects that could be launched in this month and next month. And another tactics that some of the property agents has been encouraging the investors to do is that to buy the property and sell it within 3 years. Because usually the construction period from the time that a buyer buy it from the show flat when it was first launched to the time they get the keys is approximately about 3 to 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So by then, the property is completed or near completion, they can flip the property. And the agents will encourage this buyer who is now made a tidy profit to buy the next property launch. I think this new cooling measures is quite timely because we have now more projects lining up for launch. And secondly, is also to separate the genuine home buyer, owner-occupiers from the investors.
Yes.
Because after all, residential property is supposed to be a home.
All right, so let's look at some of the numbers here. Sub-sales have jumped in recent years. We know this, up from under 200 in 2020 to over 1,300 last year. So why are we seeing such a sharp spike in these quick resales post-COVID, and what risks does this pose for Singapore's housing market?
Well, the rise in numbers kind of corresponds with the rise in the number of new launches as well, especially after the COVID lockdown is lifted. Construction, the pace of construction goes back to a bit normal. People could go back to the show flats and buy. In fact, the number or the sub-sale as a percentage of total transactions actually peaked in fourth quarter of 2023 at 9.5%. So we're talking almost about 1 out of every 10 property transactions in the private housing market, in a way, short-term investment or speculative, if you like. In the second quarter of this year, the most recent quarter that just passed, it is 4.5%. Although it has come down to about 4.2% at the end of last year, it is now starting to creep up again from 4.2% to 4.5%. And yes, I think that is one of the reasons why the government is coming up with this cooling measure. In a way, it's a bit preemptive because of new launches coming up, but they also see the signs there.
Yeah. All right. So you talked about differentiating between genuine home buyers and speculative investors, right, who really just want to make a quick buck. Do you think that this move strikes the right balance between these two groups?
the gloves hasn't come off yet. I think, you see, the government is just putting in this first because 4 years. If they want, they can lengthen it to 5 years. But of course, that could cause some inconveniences to even the genuine home buyers, because some people may say, well, I want to sell, after 4 years because a change of job, locations, or children's schools, the change in the locations of schools and so on. So lengthening it to 5 years could be slightly a bit long, because the government can also do other things, like, for example, increasing the seller's stamp duty for Singaporean buying their first property, or even permanent residents buying their first property, which currently is at 5%. So the government hasn't done that. If they want to, they could.
Okay. So you mentioned the property developers, and we want to turn to that now. The ripple effects that this new SSD measure may have on them, especially those that are selling these uncompleted units. We know that those are the units that usually are being sold for the sub-sales. So could we see maybe slower new launch sales, changes in how developers price and release their projects maybe?
I think the prices of the projects may not change that much. One of the reasons is because everybody, sellers, buyers, developers, are still trying to gauge what would be the buyer's reaction to this new set of cooling measures. And furthermore, developers' costs are pretty much locked in. Most of the cost is land costs, followed by construction costs, and those are already locked in. So the only thing that if they were to lower prices, it will just eat into their profit margin. So, which is something that's kind of painful for them to do. So they would, I think in the next 6 to 8 weeks, when the new launches come out, developers, in a way, they'll see who are the first one to jump into the water, and then see whether the water is clear or it turns red.
Oh, wow.
And then they will adjust their pricing accordingly. Subsequent developers will do that. So I think, we'll see. I mean, to see whether or not the buyers are going to be still willing to accept the original price list, or the developers will have to adjust it subsequently.
Yeah. So to your point, we have a lot of new launches to look forward to in the coming months. How much impact do you expect this new SSD change to have on overall transaction volumes? Would this move the needle at all?
Well, I think that it may not move the needle that much, because, you see, right now, the sub-sale makes up about 4.5%. Now, even if they were to drop to some of the lowest, at one time during the COVID period in 2020, it dropped to 0.7 to 0.9%, just below that. But that's a bit abnormal. I think the more normal kind of rate of sub-sale is roughly between 1 to 3%. So even if, let's say, it goes back to a more normal level, sub-sale will not totally disappear. So in a way, the kind of how it will adjust the market is that the government has already put in this 60% ABSD on foreigners, and the percentage of foreigners has dropped. It has dropped really a lot from before the cooling measures, which the percentage of units bought by foreigners was standing at about 3.7% in 2022 to just the first half of this year, it dropped to about 0.9%.
Oh my gosh.
So you see, the foreigners, basically, a lot of them have support. In fact, some of the foreigners are doing is that if they're waiting for their Singapore permanent resident status, when they get that letter, and then the seller's stamp duty dropped from 60% to 5%.
Yeah.
So foreigners are still in the market to buy. So I think that with all that in consideration, we are not going to see the transaction volume drop that much. It could drop. It could drop by 5% to 10% from the previous year. But the other thing is that the drop could also be because of the slower economic growth that's expected this year, and also the job insecurity that could also affect buying sentiments.
Yeah, so some moving parts there and many different factors to consider. And we know that these changes don't affect HDB flats because of the existing minimum occupation period. But do you think there could be some ripple effects? Could this push more buyers toward the resale HDB market, or maybe even the rental market instead?
I think not so much the rental market, because I think home ownership is still an aspiration that many local Singaporean and PR have. And as for the HDB resale market, now this will depends on people who are, what I say, kind of like on the borderline, because that means they could either buy a private property and or a HDB flat. And not everyone is eligible to buy a HDB flat.
Yeah.
So it also depends on the eligibility of the buyer. So I don't think that this new SSD is going to push more people to buy a HDB resale flat, but rather the economic conditions and the job security or insecurity, that is a more bigger factor that will actually determine whether a person might want to, say, play it safe and buy a public housing unit or to venture out into the private housing market.
All right. Well, we'll keep a close eye on how this plays out in the months to come. Big thanks to Nicholas Mak, Chief Research Officer at mogul.sg, for his time and insights today. Great chatting with you, Nicholas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day. Yes, lots more to come on the show. Stay with us on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.